You know I don't like it when you have to go on these trips. Kara, the company is sending me on an urgent task. Well then, how long are you going to be gone? It's only a week's visit. I'll be back before you know it. And this is a good opportunity for me, Kara. Try to understand. Edward was a pharmaceutical scientist. He worked at a pharmaceutical company in Long Beach, California. Edward's boss had chosen him and a few other colleagues for a project in Alaska. It would be a week-long stay at a facility there. When Edward told his girlfriend, Caroline, about the trip, she was disappointed. She never liked it when Edward had to go out of town for work, and this time he was going all the way to Alaska. Caroline was an editor at a newspaper corporation. Edward and Caroline had been together for nearly 5 years. They supported each other for their goals and ambitions in life, but living in the busy city of Long Beach and working full-time jobs made life a little overwhelming. Edward was chosen along with 3 other colleagues, James, Colton, and Elizabeth. They were to leave California on Monday morning and return on the following Saturday. The 4 boarded their flight, and after a long 12-hour journey, they landed in Sitka, Alaska. The weather was brutal here year-round. It wasn't surprising that it was snowing quite heavily. Edward took in an icy cool breeze as he went out the airport door. His phone lit up with a call. It was Caroline. "I was getting worried. When did you get off the flight? I told you to call me as soon as you get there, Ed." "I got caught up at the airport. I met this pretty young woman. She was quite interesting." "A pretty woman? Why would a pretty woman take interest in you?" "Kara, are you sure a pretty woman won't take interest in me or do anything with me?" Okay, you win, Ed." Edward and his colleagues went straight to the facility. They were surprised to see a crowd blocking off the street. The people were yelling, and some of them even had picket signs and shivered in the cold. Suddenly, a man came out of the building and rushed towards Edward. "Welcome. I'm the medical advisor at the facility." Yes, I've recognized you very well, Mr. Ludwig. I'm very fond of your work." Edward shook hands with the advisor. Just then, he heard a woman shouting nearby. She stared directly into Edward's eyes. "You will suffer the consequences. This is our land. This is the sacred ground of our ancestors. The wrath will fall on you. You'll be cursed, you selfish people. Your company's experiments are ruining the environment. Seize what you're doing before danger befalls all of us." The advisor nervously exchanged a glance with the colleagues. "I think we should go inside." When everyone had safely entered the facility, the advisor invited them into his office. "Mr. Ludwig, what are these people protesting about?" "Oh, don't exhaust your mind on these people. We've been trying to build a better future for them, but they're still bent on their superstitions. They believe in the folk tales their forefathers passed on to them. The recent experiments we've been performing in the old laboratory require more space and better equipment. We informed the authorities, who granted us access to a piece of land not too far from here, to construct a new testing facility. The rally started since then, because that piece of land happens to be a sacred sanctuary to the natives here. It's been so many years, but these natives are still stuck in the past." After a tour around the facility, the colleagues came to know the company had arranged for their stay. They had a private lodge for special guests about 30 minutes away. At around 7, the 4 colleagues were dropped off at the lodge. The temperature had dropped significantly, and the roads had snow piled into small mounds every block down. The lodge was located in a rather isolated area. A 30-minute drive back in Long Beach meant you weren't getting too far, but out here in the wilderness of Alaska, 30 minutes driving meant you covered a long distance. There was no way to return to the facility without a car. The view was amazing. There were breathtaking, snow-topped mountains in sight. Edward got out of the car and called Caroline. "What took you so long to answer?" "I dozed off. Couldn't get enough sleep without you last night. I saw a dream." What's that? I saw that you were back and you took me to the jewelry store and bought me a diamond ring. Seriously, Kara? I didn't want to tell you, but I saw the same dream. We were together. But do you know who else was there? Who? Your dad. He was paying the bill. You always need to have the last laugh, don't you, Ed? I was really missing you. I can't wait till you'll be back. When Edward reached the guest house, he was a bit disappointed to see an old-fashioned cabin. He expected better arrangements. The cabin had been vacant for a long time now, and the caretaker had recently had it cleaned out and prepared for their arrival. Do you live nearby? Is there any way we can contact you while you're away? The caretaker handed Edward a card. This is the number to the facility. If you need anything, give them a call. The caretaker looked out at the scenic mountain ranges. I should be heading home. This looks like the start of a horrible blizzard. I've been hearing the mountains whispering all day. The people here say it's a sign something terrible will happen. Yes, sure. The weather should be getting better by morning, right? Let's hope so. Thank you for all the preparations. See you tomorrow. Although the cabin did not look so great from the outside, when Edward stepped inside, he felt cozy and warm. There was a fireplace. The caretaker had prepared some food. Elizabeth was the lucky one. Being the only female, she occupied one of the rooms all to herself. Edward and his 2 male colleagues were sharing the other room. The colleagues freshened up and sat by the fire at night. They enjoyed a warm cup of cocoa together. They hoped the weather would clear up by morning, but things weren't looking so great. Soon, everyone was asleep, snug in their blankets. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, everyone woke up startled. They heard a noise. It sounded like rolling thunder. Within minutes, the whole cabin took a vigorous shake and the lights went out. Everyone became nervous. Elizabeth rushed to check the windows. Edward ran to the door. "We're covered!" Elizabeth shouted. As soon as Edward opened the door, snow rushed down on him, and an icy howling breeze entered the cabin. There was an avalanche. Are we trapped here? I don't think we can go out like this. The power is out. Call the facility and inform them immediately. Edward picked up his phone, but unfortunately, there was no network. None of the colleagues had any signal. When a few hours went by and Edward hadn't been able to call the facility for help, everyone began to get worried. We need to stay calm. With the food and water we have, we'll easily go by 3 or 4 days. The facility knows we're here. They'll send for us soon. The first night went by without a struggle. The next morning, Edward and his colleagues tried to shovel a path through the snow, but they couldn't make it too far. The fierce winds of the blizzard made it impossible to stay out. They had no choice but to return to the cabin. They managed to get the fireplace going and rationed their supplies amongst each other. On the second day, James caught a high fever and couldn't get out of bed. When help hadn't come, the colleagues began to panic. By the 4th day, supplies were at its end. The dry logs that the caretaker had gathered for the fire were nearly used up. The colleagues were falling ill. The temperature continued to drop rapidly. James went into hypothermia. The colleagues offered him their blankets and huddled around him to heat his body. But all efforts were in vain. Without food, bringing up James's body temperature would be difficult. The 4 struggled to sleep that night, but as the night went by, exhaustion got the best of them, and they drowsed off. Edward woke up to a panicked shout. James had passed away. Edward, Colton, and Elizabeth all mourned his death, but at the same time, they feared they would meet the same fate. Later that day, they took the decision to give James a decent burial out in the snow. Edward began to lose hope. Elizabeth was grieved, and Colton looked devastated. The blizzard was at its peak. The three gathered all the blankets, bedsheets, pillows, and everything that they had to keep themselves warm, but it was little help. 7 days had gone by since they had been trapped in the cabin. Edward, Colton, and Elizabeth managed to melt the snow for water, but they had nothing to eat for the last 3 days. They all sat together in despair. The next day went by in misery. The three were suffering from extreme starvation. Elizabeth was bound to her bed. She had hit her breaking point. She knew she wouldn't make it. That night, Elizabeth passed away. We have to do something. We won't make it in this cold. There's nothing we can do but wait, Colton. Colton kept silent for a while. He then spoke out in a low voice. Have you heard the legend of the Wendigo? The natives of this land fear them greatly. It was a creature that lurked these woods. Its body was skeletal and deformed. It had a lipless mouth and jagged teeth. Its steps left footprints full of blood, and their breath sounded like a strange hiss. If you ever had the misfortune of spotting one, you would never forget its glowing eyes, long fangs, and its atrocious long tongue. The creature survived in these cold regions. They feasted on men, anyone who ventured into their territory. The natives say, when the Wendigo is out to hunt, they bring about strong blizzards. They wander the land, eternally seeking to fulfill their ferocious appetite. We're stranded in the bitter snow of the North Woods. There's no telling how long we'll be trapped. There's no other way to survive out here. Then, Edward tried to console Colton. Colton, I know it's been difficult, but bear with me. We can't lose our sanity. Colton murmured, I can't take this hunger anymore. I have to. In the coldness and darkness of the night, Colton and Edward miserably shivered in their cold blankets. Edward was having difficulty speaking. His lips were frozen. His tears formed into ice on his cheeks. He had lost all hope of rescue. Do you think help will come? You're making a mistake, Edward. You won't survive like this. Look around you. We came here as 4, and now there's just me and you. There's a reason the natives speak of the Wendigo. It's because the Wendigo stalks these same grounds. Days, weeks, months out here in the coldest of winters. There's no other way. How long can a being resist the desire to survive? Edward ran his nails along the wall. He crossed out yet another day he and Colton had been trapped in this brutal condition. The only good news was that the blizzard had finally ended. Perhaps they could attempt to make their way out of here. As the two discussed what they should do, suddenly they heard a noise. Edward and Colton lit up in joy. They ran out to see a rescue squad in the distance. They anxiously jumped and waved their hands. After a day's rest in Sitka, Edward and Colton returned to California. Caroline was desperate to meet Edward when he got off his flight. The minute she caught a glimpse of him, she knew he was unwell. He had become thin and emaciated. After a thorough checkup at the hospital, Edward returned to the comfort of his apartment after a long time. Caroline was terrified when she heard what happened, but she was relieved that Edward was with her again. The two went to bed that night. Caroline finally got some peace of mind now that Edward was beside her. She went to sleep content. In the middle of the night, however, Edward woke up. He held his stomach. The hunger was unbearable. Hunger was eating him inside out. He went to the kitchen and opened the fridge. Caroline had prepared food for him. He took out his favorite dish and popped it into the microwave. But when he sat down on the table, he wasn't able to eat. It felt as if he tasted something odd. The smell was unappetizing. He took out all the other cooked food, but he was unable to gulp down a single bite. Edward peered into the refrigerator once again. His eyes caught something wrapped in a parcel. Meat. Raw meat. Edward suddenly felt an intense craving. Edward stared at the empty parcel. He had gotten a little relief. But he was not content. He still felt the urge to eat more. What was going on? Edward couldn't understand what was happening to him. As he stood there bewildered, he recalled those horrible days in Alaska. There's a reason the natives speak of the Wendigo. It's because the Wendigo stalks these same grounds, days, weeks, months out here in the coldest of winters. There's no other way. How long can a being resist the desire to survive? They say the Wendigo is possessed. It becomes plagued with an insatiable hunger. They continue to hunt until they take down those who they once loved. But no matter how much they eat, they still remain hungry. Click on the subscribe button and check out more awesome videos on our channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon because you know it's interesting.